Recording, sir.
Okay.
All right, so here we are, episode 4 of the Summoning Hour with my guest, Shawn Sharp. He's an old co-worker of mine from ArenaNet and Wargaming. But let's let him talk a little bit about his career-long 28 years in the game industry. So what's gone on with you in 28 years?
Well, I've gotten a lot older. God, I'm old. I work with people that are, hadn't been born when I started in the industry.
When did you start in the industry?
Actually, 1990.
Okay.
I like to tell the story that I turned the job down in 89. I'd started out as a graphic designer and illustrator, and my wife and I moved to Portland, and Dynamics, a company down in Eugene, Oregon, called me to see if I was interested in joining the video game industry and coming into art direct. And it's like, I don't even know what video games are. So really liked the people and liked what they had to say, but it's like, probably not the right job for me at this time, and just moved here. But a year later, they called me up again, and I was a little more savvy. And so, took the job. So that was 1990.
Man, I was 4.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yes. But it was, it was really interesting, and a big part of the interest to me at the time is what still intrigues me about game development is that it's collaborative storytelling.
Yeah.
Collaborative creativity, and I've always been a huge role player.
Okay.
And still do. Tabletop role playing. And that was the thing that interested me the most about it is, get together with artists and programmers and designers and tell a story.
Yeah.
And so, it's things that where we got this.
Here we go.
Obviously things have changed a great deal since that time, but those basic, that basic premise is still there.
Yep.
And it's still what fascinates me about it.
Well, and something that's resurging is D&D right now.
Yeah.
If you look at Twitch, there are more and more people doing dedicated group broadcasts on Twitch.
Oh yeah.
Either in the same room or across from their own offices or their own PlayStations, basically. And they're all doing D&D.
Yeah.
And there's a huge Penny Arcade group, Hello C-Team, who does that with one of the founders of Penny Arcade. Kate Welch is on that.
Oh, right.
Who's now working at Wizards and on D&D. So there you go. That's kind of the games industry as a whole right now. Once you're in, there's nowhere you can't go.
That's very true.
But yeah, so player stories are getting much more interesting and much more involved now with games kind of like PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, but then also a lot more of those player mod tools coming in. And so player stories are actually a huge focus right now, but D&D is a huge draw for audiences right now.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. I wasn't expecting that anytime soon.
Yeah.
But it just kind of exploded.
We've never considered streaming our games, but with all of the drinking and swearing, I'm not quite sure how well it would come across. That and lots of political conversations.
Oh yeah.
But yeah. And so, and it's interesting to see, again, how that process, as far as, game development has evolved over time. Just looking back at way back in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And just team sizes and everything. And it's also kind of interesting in that, now I'm a producer on Minecraft. And in some respects, there's a little bit of that, kind of same, smaller teams and more rapid development.
Yeah.
Than, as things got into more AAA content development, where it takes weeks and weeks to do a single thing. And now it's like, hey, here's an idea. Let's see if we can get it done by the end of the week.
Yeah. And now you're seeing, I mean, the idea of rapid iteration, that's really coming on in a lot of the industry, but it's also been around. But you'll find companies like Spotify and Amazon and Pixar that are all about that fast iteration, and not only just that iteration, but accepting failure.
Yeah.
And failing fast, finding out what really didn't work.
Yep.
And no matter how weird or strange or out there the idea is, if they can convince someone to say it's worthwhile just to try this, they do it.
Yeah.
And so I think games industry folks are starting to get in on that and really start thinking, how can we get content out faster? Because, I mean, our experience with Guild Wars 2 showed us that doing content every 2 weeks was really rough on the team.
Yep.
It was rough on the players.
Uh-huh.
There was certain challenges with that. And it just created a huge problem with the, 250 people at ArenaNet when we were there?
Yeah, I think something like that. Yeah.
Like multiple teams, not always on the same page. I mean, it was new territory for all of them. So, of course, it wasn't going to be kink free and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah.
But, I mean, it certainly had its challenges.
Yeah, and when we were first started, well, I was the 24th person at ArenaNet.
Oh, wow.
Kind of weird because I was the 24th at ArenaNet, and then 15 years earlier, however long earlier, I was the 13 years, 24th person at Dynamics.
Oh.
And that too got up to like 250 people before it was closed down. But yeah, and it early on, I think we were trying kind of rapid iteration, not in the agile sort of way.
Yeah.
But just, when you've got 24, 26 people, it's like, hey, here's an idea. Let's try this and see how it works out. And, if it doesn't, you're throwing away some money, but, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
Later, when after we'd shipped Guild Wars 2 and we were trying that to get more into an agile development structure and shipping content every 2 weeks and so on, we had been more not to geek out on production stuff, but more waterfall for long enough, and the development cycle was so long that to then try to do rapid iteration, it was a difficult transition.
Yeah. And it wasn't just a single team to try it.
Yeah.
We just said, the whole studio, get going. So, I mean, changing philosophies is hard enough. I mean, saying you're going to start working out and then being dedicated to it and changing your diet all at the same time is hard enough by yourself. But now trying to get people to do that as massive teams with 200 some people, we're not the military. We're not that fast.
I also had to have some uncomfortable conversations with folks at the executive level explaining that, yes, you did pull together a team of, we're mostly like teams of 15 people or so.
Yeah.
But you don't have the skill sets in this team. You've got like 4 environmental artists, and that's great. But that environment artist is not going to do your character concepting and your creature modeling and rigging and animation and effects and UI.
Right.
Those are different skill sets. Not really what they wanted to hear, but that's just the way it is. You really need a graphics programmer on here. You've got a network programmer. That's great, but different skill set.
Right. Oh, man. Yeah. But I mean, and that kind of stuff isn't and wasn't just localized to ArenaNet.
Oh, no, definitely not.
That is definitely an industry-wide kind of miscommunication and misunderstanding of what certain people's skill sets are.
Yeah. And there was a day, again, going way back when I started, at least on the art side of things, there was much more of a, generality. Most artists could do a little bit of everything. It wasn't quite so specialized.
Right.
Which was just a natural progression. It had to be that way. And I think in more, there's still areas of casual games in particular where it is a little more generalized. But in like AAA development, you can't expect your character modeler to also be a UI designer, and effects artist, and
give feedback, sure, but to do the job, no.
Yeah.
So what's it like for artists now? Like, they have dedicated skill sets, so they are concept artists, they are character artists, they're hard surface modelers, they're kind of organic modelers and animators. How do artists stay flexible and be able to have enough opportunities to sustain themselves? Because I do see a lot of artists still taking a lot of freelance jobs. And I mean, I know yourself. How many jobs were you working at one point? You had like 6 different projects.
Yeah, for several different companies.
And that's atypical.
That is.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, at one point, I was like managing a couple of projects for an Indian company, doing work for companies in the U.S. Had my own startup company, and some other freelance illustration work and so on. That was a little crazy. No, I think most artists are leaning towards working in a specific area. It's like, yes, I do character modeling. I do animation. I do, again, it's gotten so specialized. But I do think there are some that are still cross-discipline.
Would you advise more people to be more kind of jack of all trades, or would you say really sit down with yourself and say, which one am I the best at, and just dive right in?
Yeah, I think it depends on what your interests are, what type of games you're most interested in developing, what type of position. Most of the larger companies are going to look for specialists. The unfortunate thing about jack of all trades, the expression is jack of all trades, master of none.
Right.
I don't necessarily believe that it's true, but that's where it originated.
It's still kind of everyone's perception about that.
And if you're an EA, you're a whoever, you're looking for somebody who really is going to be able to get in there and do concept work or character modeling or whatever, and you are going to typically be hiring them for one very specific task.
Because you've already had the team built, and now you're starting to understand the specific skill set that you have a weakness in. So then you don't look for the broad generalist, you look for the specific person who's going to solve your problem.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. But I do think there is still, to be able to speak with knowledge of the different areas and say, hey, here's something we might want to consider on the, as far as effects, or if I'm one of the issues we ran into that I've seen a number of places, but was a thing at ArenaNet, for instance, had extraordinary concept artists, but for the most part, they hadn't done any modeling. And so they'd come up with great characters or environment designs or whatever, but it wouldn't translate into game art. It's like, we need, and I'd have to go and say, hey, we need to make these changes to this creature design so it'll work with this animation process, or we want to reuse this rig. So I think having, that crossover of skill sets really does allow you to do your job better. In a lot of cases.
Right.
So you might concept something that is really great, but there's just no way we can bring it to life in a game.
It's like, I know this was probably more of a problem early 2000s, but when someone made their 200,000 poly house, it's like, oh, that's great, but it's not usable at all. Now, I mean, 200,000 probably seems completely reasonable with all of the other optimization technologies that we have, level of details, HD textures, texture I mean, texture management and everything has gotten so crazy, even just in like the last 5 years. It's so, I mean, it's less of a problem now, or that poly count is less of a specific problem for specific things. It's more of a, oops, I missed that, as opposed to like, we just can't do that.
Yeah, yeah. And then, but there are still, you know, also games, and again, kind of maybe more in the casual area where studio does benefit from having somebody who can sit down and, you know, say on the art side and do sprite animations and do UI and do character modeling and, you know, that more of a, because if you're talking about a small, quick turnaround project, you may not have the budget and the wherewithal to have people with 8 different very specific disciplines.
Yeah.
You know, so you do need some more jack of all trade types.
And with startups, I'm assuming you basically take what you can get, and if someone has to learn something on the job, you're much more amenable to that.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that with startups. Yeah, I'm not sure on some of the larger studios that are doing multiple you know, casual game type projects.
Yeah.
I suspect in some cases they do have a small staff of specialists. And then, you know, there's also a lot of that you can farm out. So, yes, we need somebody who's really, really great at this one discipline, but we can't really afford to have them on staff permanently because it's a short-term need.
Gotcha.
So let's reach out to an external source.
Interesting. So now you mentioned that you have a startup going on.
Yes.
Are you art directing that, or are you wearing many hats?
Well, I'm wearing many hats, I suppose, but mostly art directing.
Okay.
Yes, Skyrim Studios. We are currently working on Gloom Digital. We have a partnership with Atlas Games, who did the tabletop version.
Nice.
And we're actually being distributed through Asmodee. So it seems a natural fit there for the type of game we're doing. And it's definitely a moonlight project. You know, everybody has a day job. So we're pulling in time where we can. And we've got a couple of really extraordinary artists, you know, as far as on the art side, that are probably more jack of all trades than I am, because I've been doing production long enough that my technical skills have really waned. Whereas they have that as well as animation and modeling and so on, covered far better than I do. Been doing some modeling for it, but there's a certain point at which it's like, okay, I need somebody who really knows what they're doing to take this over. I could figure it out, but this person already knows it. So yeah, and I think from what I've seen, that is pretty typical of startup companies. Yeah, I've known over the years a number of people that have done that, and there's just different disciplines they may themselves not have, and so try to reach out and find, you know, a friend or somebody else who's interested in indie game development and pull them into the fold. And you kind of have to, you know, well, we went through a startup or through Kickstarter, so we did get funding, but I think you kind of have to go into it with eyes open. You know, this may or may not turn into anything. There's really no way of knowing. It's a passion project.
Right. I mean, with moonlighting, where everyone's just pulling in their time as they have free hours or as they take a day off here and there kind of thing, like, that's got to come with its own challenges. I mean, traditional development is, hey, this is your 9 to 5. This is what you get paid to do. But everyone already has that. So then you're talking an hour a night at the most consistent, unless someone's just like, okay, I'm a night owl, I'm going to work until 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
And I don't have to be in until work until noon kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
no, that's tough. And also then you also have to deal with time differences.
Yeah.
So if you've got people on the East Coast and hey, a guy over in Germany and so on, it's like coordinating all of that is a challenge.
Yeah, right now I'm working with Heroes Hype. It's a community run tournament organizer basically for the Heroes of the Storm community. And they're partnered with Blizzard to run the HGC Open Division, which is kind of the amateur league who are trying to break into the pro scene, the pro esports scene.
Cool.
And so I do writing, check it out. But if it's not like we cover both the European division and the North American division. And so we have tournament organizers who are on European time, like Monday and Tuesday, and then, or Sunday and Monday, and then Tuesday, Wednesday, they're on North American time. And so we have some European volunteers, but we also it's all moonlighting. And so far we have enough people to cover it. And so the people who cover both time zones are just fried because at one point the tournament's wrapping up at like noon, our time, but then 2 to 3 in the morning because they're on the East Coast when it's the North American time. So they're constantly changing their schedule, but they're just trying to cover this because this is actually a partnership with Blizzard. Like they are the official tournament organizers for this league. I mean, that's a pretty big deal to work with Blizzard as you're all community run, you're all volunteers, and this is just what they want to do.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
So I've seen some troubles with the time zones. I've seen some troubles with just making sure everyone knows what's going on. I mean, you have a staff meeting on Sundays. Well, who's going to wake up in the middle of the night in Europe to listen?
Yeah. Well, it reminds me we have a Monday call with Asmodee, which I've only made a couple of those. Our lead designer, business manager, partner with at Skyship manages this, but the call, I've tried to make a couple of them, is at 6 a.m. my time.
Oh wow.
So fortunately, which is not a big deal, but it's not a problem to be awake. It's a little more of a problem to be coherent. How much espresso can I drink before 6 a.m.?
Or you're talking about changing your own nighttime schedule so that you can wake up in time for that and be coherent and then do your daytime stuff.
That's the other thing. I've got an 8:30 meeting at the office. But also when, I've managed lots of outsourcing, and it's always been interesting and actually a pleasant challenge to be working with teams over in China or Korea or India. And this was something that, like when I was at ArenaNet, actually worked out well because I'd have, the internal team working on stuff from, so I'd get in around 9 or whatever and leave at, 7 or 8 or 9. Anyhow, at the end of the day, okay, here's what I need to hand off to the external team, and then be able to wake up the next morning and it's done.
Oh, wow.
And then sometimes I would go home and I'd have calls and email exchanges at 11 or midnight or so, beginning the day for them. So, and then go to bed, and then the next morning the work's in the inbox, and hey, that works out really well. Yeah,
I imagine once you get it running like a smooth machine, once everyone knows what they need to be doing and how they do it, it works out really well for everyone.
Yeah,
but it introduces a lot of problems at first.
Yeah, it does. And one of the benefits of working with some of the offshore companies too is that they
That's kind of cool.
They are so accustomed to working with studios in the U.S.
Maybe after these bikes we can turn around.
Oh, okay. They adjust their own schedules, and they will make themselves available at middle of the night, their time for meetings and things. It's just kind of cost of doing business for them. So, whereas when you're all just a bunch of folks and you've got your day jobs and you're in different time zones, and that's a lot more difficult to coordinate.
Now, you've talked a lot about managing artists and kind of getting them through certain problems, but what's the difference, or maybe what's some ideas and strategies that you have for managing artists that may not work for managing designers, or kind of vice versa? Some advice for someone's managing designers, but it doesn't work on artists, but it would work with them. Do you have any kind of insight on managing personalities, or kind of discipline as personalities kind of shift towards a discipline?
Well, that's interesting. I think there is sometimes a perception that, for people who are not artists or who haven't worked with artists, that there's sometimes a perception that, they're, those creative types, they just won't commit to anything and blah, blah, blah. And actually in the game industry, I have found, I've managed artists and designers and engineers and so on, but on the art side, you really can predict how long different tasks are going to take. In some ways, it's a little easier to manage on the asset level than it is some of the, I hate to say more abstract, but some of the tasks like design work, or even some engineering goals where, we can guess at how many story points, if you will, or how many days, how many hours, but we can't, there's a lot of things where you can't really say for sure it's done and it's right until you've had a chance to get it in the game and test it. A lot of art assets and a lot of, within the art disciplines, that's not necessarily true. You often do know if it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll show you.
Usually you have tools that allow you to see it, what it would look like in the game without having to see it in the game.
And it adheres to, certain specs and so on. When you're in the discovery stage, though, you do need to be careful not to try to overplan.
Right.
Because you're still on the creative side, on the art side, the design side, you're still figuring out what it is you're making.
Yeah.
And so, you can set different review points. Let's get together and review where we are with this feature at this point. But you can't really say this feature will be complete at this point, because you don't even know what that feature is.
Right.
Yet.
And you don't want to set your art target too early before you have necessarily all your tools in your toolbox, because then you set what the quality bar is, but then you get something that starts working, and then suddenly that art bar has raised, and then you have to go back and address everything else that you've previously made.
Exactly. And I think, as far as personalities, artists and designers are, very similar in that anything can be iterated on, anything can be improved. There isn't necessarily only one single right answer to something. Whereas I think on the engineering side, it's a little more binary, where that's ironic, where you can say, yes, we are done with this because it does what it is intended to do.
Right.
And I think on design side, it's even a little more difficult to have that solid gate at which you say, this is correct.
Yeah.
And particularly once you start pulling in the community feedback, it's really rare that you have a absolute right, absolute wrong answer to anything.
And you might have, take one of the events from Guild Wars 2, it might meet all the requirements of what was defined, what an event was, but it could still not be fun.
Yeah.
And maybe it's fun for a single player, but when you get 200 players all swamping the same thing, maybe that's when it's not fun, and you don't know that until you get 200 people bashing on it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
to get 200 people playing it, you're not going to get that from an internal playtest. You're barely going to get that from a closed beta. And so you kind of have to just at some point accept this is what we know as fun and commit to it, and then pay the piper down the road to fix it.
Yeah.
If you decide to fix it. So that admission of we think it's fun as far as we know is just kind of the price you pay, and something that you have to be willing to bite the bullet on.
Sure. That while at ArenaNet, that was something I always made a point of, or whenever possible, tried to go to the QA department and say, okay, is this fun?
Yeah.
Is this the right solution to it? Because, and part of that is, obviously QA is the closest we have to the final audience, but also when you're, and this is definitely true as an artist that I have found, and I'm sure as a designer and so on, that when you're so close to something and you've been noodling on it for so long, oddly enough, you can overlook things.
Yeah.
And, you stop becoming the target audience for it. And I will even, in fact, yesterday, I was working on some UI design, and I was on a Discord call with the other folks with Skyship, and I actually called my wife over to look at it and say, okay, which of these three do you feel is the best solution to this? Because we've been looking at it too long.
Yeah.
And, and she was like, oh, this one, and here's why. And just ran right down the list of here's why you should go with this option. So,
Interesting.
cool. Okay, that's the one we're going with then.
And that goes to prove the power of usability testing.
Yeah.
You go outside of your demographic, and you have your target, but then you can still branch outside of that. So maybe like with Gloom, it's a card game, right? Mm-hmm. So you get a card game player to come out and say, is this good or not? Hey, they might like it, but then maybe you're just like, does this appeal to anyone other than card game players? So then you start getting first-person shooter game players. Does this mean anything to you?
Yeah.
No. Well, that's what we would expect. Good.
And it's interesting in, working on Minecraft, because it is such a community-driven product.
Right.
And so, we always have millions of people we can reach out to and say, what do you think of this?
Yeah.
And try to stay flexible enough to work that feedback into what we're doing. And, there's always, again, quite literally millions of people that are willing to pony up ideas as to what they'd like to see in the game, or new features or things they're not happy with. And I mean, to some degree, that's true of any game.
Yep.